Hey everybody, welcome to the next Collecting the King show, and this one is episode 18, I believe, and 18, holy cow, we got that far. Yeah, episode 18, and this one is called Having Fun with Elvis on Stage. And boy, I'll tell you, I've been having a lot of fun finding out all the stuff that we have found out about Elvis on stage and Elvis's tours. That is the reason why today we have with us, our guest is Steve Orlando. Say hello, Steve.
Hello, audience. How are you? And thank you, Robert, for having me.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it.
And the reason Steve is here for many reasons, but here's the story behind him being a guest. Okay, he's not a big time expert on anything. He didn't write a book on Elvis, or he didn't. He hasn't done any appearances at Graceland, or he hasn't done anything at my shows. Guest stars, signing, and all that kind of stuff. He's just an everyday fan, but it's interesting how young you became a fan, because you became a fan when you were about
10
years old, right? So tell us a little bit about that, the beginning of how that all started for you. What made you want to be a fan, or what made you a fan at 10 years old? Sure. How did that happen, and what year was that?
1989, and I guess at the time, the current music of the day, I just didn't have any interest. And one day, flipping around the channels, I think on HBO, I must have landed on This Is Elvis, the story from beginning to end. And by the end of that hour and a half, I just said, Elvis is my guy. And it all started from there in 1989.
So I met you, if I remember right, you were like 15 years old. You guys contacted me, you and Dave Allen contacted me. It was I don't even know how it happened. I think it might have been a phone call or anything. I don't even think the internet was happening at the time. It was just a phone call, I think. And I know you guys had contacted me because you heard about me from somewhere. How did you hear about me?
It was really to Dave Allen's credit that he knew to reach out to you. And
okay.
I don't recall the details because I was just a high school kid. But as a fan, Dave had this idea of creating this newsletter focusing on the current Elvis items available in the day, having some valuable articles and get some information out. It was a different time back then. The technology hadn't developed, so we had newsletters. And we ended up having probably 7 or so issues. And thankfully, Robert agreed to be a guest columnist for some of our issues, and really it gave us a whole new level of credibility with the great information Robert had when it came to the record collecting, amongst other items.
And when we first got together again, I know you told me that you actually still had copies of these letters, and I happen to have some copies here. This is kind of what the letter looked like, okay? And I don't know how well you can see that, but that's the letter. And there were quite a few volumes here. The first one says July 1994, I believe. Mm-hmm. And then it goes on. There's another March, April, May, June issue, and it kind of goes on from, I guess, issue 1 through, I have issue 1 through 6, I hear, with maybe 2 is missing. But anyway, oh no, they're all here, 1 through 6. So what's funny was, he contacted me and he said, something about writing a column about collecting and about Elvis records or whatever, and I assumed it was because I was a dealer or something. Maybe that's how Dave knew.
Must be.
I really don't know. But here's the ironic thing, folks. This is kind of cool, because when I decided to write this article and I agreed to do it, basically it was just what I'm doing now. I would talk about Elvis records and the value of them, and if there were bootlegs out there, like illegal stuff, I would talk about that. Or if there were people faking stickers or photos and stuff like that, I would write about that. But it was always about collecting. But ironically, I called the article "Collecting the King." So the whole Collecting the King idea, or the title, came from back as far back as 1994. My show I didn't call my show the Collecting the King in Memphis, probably until the 2000s. I can't remember exactly what happened, but I know we were calling it Elvis Con, and then Graceland sent a letter to us saying you can't call it Elvis Con, and Okay, fine. So I'll call it Collecting the King. And as I mentioned in the first episode of the show, I wrote a column for Elvis International called Collecting the King. But it all started here. It all started with your newsletter, and then I expanded, and then I wrote for Elvis International for, boy, I don't know how long, quite a few issues. And but that's how we first met. So getting back to our show today, what's going on is I have mentioned Al Dvorin many times. Al was, I want to consider him a good friend, because he was more than just a celebrity, and he never acted like a celebrity whenever he came to Memphis. Those of you who don't know Al Dvorin is famous for the term, Elvis has left the building, thank you and good night. Also, he's also the same guy that would do the announcements during the show or before the show. So if you watch, I believe, Elvis in concert, you'll hear Al's voice as he's talking about the super souvenirs. Get your Elvis super souvenir, the photo for $2. You know, all these different things for ridiculously low prices back then. But it was his voice. So you hear him in Elvis in concert. You hear him at the end, I believe. Elvis recorded live Madison Square Garden. I could be wrong about that.
At the end of the Memphis show.
The Memphis show, for sure, right. Elvis has recorded live in Memphis. But anyway, Al was really a big part behind the scenes of Elvis's touring career. And a lot of people don't know it, and a lot of people never gave him the proper credit I think he deserved. Although, you know, when he decided that he was going to go and do shows, which he did my show a couple times, and then I saw him, I think the first time I ever saw him was in Portage, Indiana, when for the Elvis Fantasy Fest or whatever that they have there. And I think that's where I actually met him. And then he showed up in Memphis and everything. Then I found out he lived in Chicago. And then I met his family, and I met Howard, his son. And of course, what we're going to show you today or talk about today will prove how big a part of Elvis's career Al Dvorin was. What happened was I got a hold of a tub. It was like this big tub of, and it said itineraries on it. It had a lot of stuff in it, you know, a lot of paperwork and all kinds of things. And when I started digging through it one day, I noticed that there were all these really cool things about Elvis on tour. And some stuff I didn't know about. But then I'm not an expert about Elvis on tour. Like, I can't tell you every jumpsuit he wore, except for what he wore in Chicago. The Chicago matinee, which I'm pretty sure I've been vindicated on that as far as what he wore. But I did not know a lot. So I had shot some scenes of my new film, Honest to God, at Steve's office. And so we got into conversation, and when I saw all this stuff, I said, you know, the perfect person would be Steve Orlando, because this guy is amazing. I mean, he knows everything about, well, maybe not everything, but as you will see, his knowledge of Elvis on tour is incredible. And we sat down, and right over there, as a matter of fact, and opened that tub up and started going through everything. And we came up with pretty much what you see here. These were all papers that were just thrown into like paper bag or plastic bags. So we started going through all of these plastic bags, and we started pulling out all these documents, and then started finding stuff in there. And then over here on the other side, Steve, that basket over there holds actual books from that Al kept. About all the tour stuff that he did. So that's the background. And so I said to Steve, I said, you know, we found some incredible stuff here. And he was telling me that some stuff that he didn't know nothing about. So I said, you know, let's do a show. So here we are. So Steve, let's talk about some of the cool stuff that we found amongst all this this history of Elvis on tour.
And it was really a great privilege to be able to go through these documents, and going through them, the sheer genius and tenacity, I guess is the word, of Al Dvorin, the meticulous notes he kept, how he kept everything together, for each concert, the sales results of the different souvenirs, and he did it in a manner where what he would do is, find as many pieces of hotel stationery as possible, and that's what he did all of his notes at the end of a night in making sure the numbers all jived. Some of his notes were on brown paper bags. I don't know if we found any napkins, but it was just amazing to see how he kept track of this very big operation during the 70s souvenir sales. But some of these documents do go back to the 50s, and I think one of the first things we should talk about is some of the information from some of these 1957 concerts. That year, Elvis did a lot less touring compared to 1956, 1955. I think he only did something like 28 concerts in 1957. Among them was a set of West Coast shows at the end of October. These were 2 shows in San Francisco on October 26th, a show just across the bay in Oakland on October 27th, and then 2 famous shows in Los Angeles at the Pan Pacific, October 28th and 29th. So, okay, Elvis did 5 concerts. Great. Well, in these documents, we uncovered some Western Union telegrams that Al Dvorin sent to the various managers of these buildings. Some dated October 14th and October 15th. So, 10, 14 days prior to showtime. And the text of one of these telegrams is the following. Please wire collect immediately local scale and requirements governing musicians playing show Cow Palace. So this is referring to the San Francisco shows on October 26th. So we have that example for the San Francisco show. We have the same example for the next night in Oakland. That's right here. And then we also have the one regarding the Los Angeles shows. Okay, well, it doesn't end there. There was 2 more examples of these telegrams asking for these local scale requirements, dated the same day, October 14th, but it's to a venue in Salt Lake City, Utah. And in addition to that, another one, a venue in Sacramento, California. So Robert and I surmised that they were planning on actually doing a date in Salt Lake City and Sacramento. And my guess, in terms of looking at the map, it would have been ideal that Salt Lake City, Utah, the show should have happened on October 24th. And then Sacramento, California, you would think a show would have happened on October 25th. For some reason, these 2 dates never occurred. And I would love to dig in further to find out why did they pull the plug at the last minute, because just 10 days prior, on October 14th, the plan was to have a show on, I presume, October 24th and 25th, 1957 in Salt Lake City and Sacramento. Amazing.
Yeah, and that's what's really cool about everything that we found, and that's just scratching the surface. I mean, weren't there other? Didn't we find other paperwork where Elvis was going to also perform in the 70s? He was going to do a show here or do a show there, and they never happened, right?
Right. This is a really good point you're bringing up, Robert, and if I can pull that. You're referring to something we found, one of the later tours, July 1976. Actually, it was the first tour after Red, Sonny, and Dave were fired. But the original plan of that show, and this is something interesting, it was unusual. Elvis did a couple of shows in Syracuse, New York, July 25th and July 27th, 1976. And I always thought, that is so weird that they would go back to the same city 2 days later. It never happened prior to that, and it didn't happen. Well, actually, it happened in Saginaw in the next spring in '77. But up until then, it never happened before. Why is that? Well, what we found in this document is they were actually planning on July 25th to do a show in Binghamton, New York, at the Broome County Memorial Auditorium. So for some reason, they couldn't get it done, so they had to fill in the date. So, oh heck, just let's go back to Syracuse. And Elvis eventually did make it to Binghamton, New York for May 26th and 27th, 1977, doing 2 shows in a row on one of the final tours. And here it is. This is the itinerary, and we'll get a picture of that up close later. But clear as day, Sunday, July 25th, the plan was Binghamton, New York, with a pencil crossed out and written right above it, Syracuse.
Oh, that's right. I remember that.
Yeah, amazing. And also, they weren't sure at the time of figuring out this July 25th date, they weren't sure where they were going to be on July 31st. That was a blank day. They were in New Haven, Connecticut on July 30th. They had Hampton Roads, Virginia set for August 1st. They didn't know where they were going to go on the day in between. They decided just to add a date in Hampton Roads. And so that's also listed here in pencil.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely Elvis history is what it is. Another thing here, I noticed the two top pages. We were going to talk about that.
Ah, yes.
Al kept a record, like he said, of just about everything. But one of the things we stumbled on, we thought was really cool, was matching forms where they showed where the crew and the band stayed, and then where the Colonel, Elvis and the Colonel stayed, right? And there they are.
Yes, this document is in reference to the July 75 tour that started in Oklahoma City, ended in Asheville, North Carolina. And this one itinerary of hotels is labeled Elvis and the Colonel, and then the second one is for the show group. And it depends on the city. Sometimes Elvis and the Colonel and the crew and the band stayed in the same hotel. Sometimes they stayed in separate hotels. So just for the sake of history, they stayed in the same hotel in Oklahoma City, in Terre Haute, Indiana, but they stayed in different hotels in Cleveland. They stayed in the same hotel in Charleston, West Virginia, the same hotel in Niagara Falls, different hotels in Springfield and New Haven, Connecticut, Springfield, Massachusetts. They stayed in different hotels in Uniondale, New York. They stayed in different hotels in Norfolk, Virginia, the same hotel in Greensboro, North Carolina, and the same hotel for the last 3 dates in Asheville, North Carolina, which in my opinion, those 3 shows in Asheville were dynamite.
So where did he stay in Chicago?
Well, in 1972, June 16th and 17th, he stayed at the Conrad Hilton in downtown Chicago. And then the morning of June 18th, now this was interesting. He stayed in Chicago after his last of the 3 shows that Saturday night. He stayed into Sunday morning and left Midway Airport on Sunday morning to go to, was Fort Worth, Texas the next day? Fort Worth, Texas, June 18th. Which is unusual because I always thought after Elvis has left the building, he was on his way to the airport going to the next city. And I'm sure that usually was the case. But in Chicago in 72, that wasn't the case. He stayed the night. But then 76 and 77, October and May, they didn't stay at the same hotel. For some reason, they chose the Arlington Park Hilton, which, for our friends that are not from the Chicagoland area, that's about 45 minutes of a drive northwest of the Chicago Stadium. I don't know why they chose a hotel so far away from the venue, but for those last 2 times that Elvis was in Chicago, they did. Privacy,
right? Mostly. Maybe, I mean, because a lot of times, if I remember, I heard other people say, maybe even Al say it a long time ago, that they had to hide him a lot of times because people would find him. They would find out what hotel he was staying at. So maybe in Chicago it was better off that he stayed in a suburban hotel, and then that way he couldn't be found. I'm just speculating, but based on what I've heard, I think I even heard Ed Bonja say something about that at one time because I remember talking to him about that. Okay, we don't want to go too much into the 70s. Let's get back to go back in time here. So we were originally talking about 57. Now, talk about something, like I said, I'm not big on the concerts and everything. I know concerts that were recorded and weren't recorded, and the releases like FTD and what RCA released, Madison Square Garden, all that kind of stuff, and Aloha from Hawaii. But what I didn't know, which was something we found out in here, thanks to going through these papers. And a lot of you people already know this, I guess, if you're into the tour stuff. I'm into collecting, so that's something I'm not that up on. Was that Elvis did a concert in Hawaii in 57?
Sure did.
Right? Talk about that. Yeah. I mean, we found paperwork on that, didn't we?
We sure did. So going back to that end of October tour, ended with those 2 shows in Los Angeles. Well, a few days go by, and they actually boarded a ship called the Matsonia to sail from San Francisco all the way to Honolulu. Elvis was on that ship. Tom Diskin, some of the members of the Memphis Mafia at the time. Maybe it wasn't coined Memphis Mafia by that point, but it was, his cousins, a man named Arthur Hooten, Lamar Fike, George Klein. They boarded the ship and sailed to Honolulu, and Elvis performed 3 concerts, 2 on November 10th, if I'm not mistaken, and 1 on November 11th. And one of the documents we found, several interesting documents, was copies of the stubs of some of the tickets to board the ship. We have in one of these files George Klein's ticket, Lamar Fike's ticket, and some of the other cast of characters. And most importantly, what I think is the coolest document.
Is it this one?
It's in there.
Okay, let me see if I can find it here.
Well, because obviously if you're going to do a concert, you got to have your
Instruments.
supplies and your instruments. Well, what are you going to do? You got to ship your instruments over the Pacific to the islands.
And here it is. This is a United Airlines. I don't want to take it out of the book. We have many, many things here. But this is an example right here of the United Airlines where they shipped it. And what's interesting is Scotty Moore signed for it, which is kind of cool. Okay, I mean, I know it's not the original copy, but still, it's kind of neat. Why would Scotty Moore sign for the, and what was this for? What was this signature all about?
This was, if I recall from this document, which was dated November 4th of 1957, from Elvis Presley, Knickerbocker Hotel, Los Angeles, California, signed by Scotty Moore. Declared value of these instruments, $4,000.
That's it.
Yeah.
$4,000. Wait a minute, isn't a guitar worth like $4,000 now? I mean, you can buy a guitar for $4,000, can't you? A real fancy one, a real nice one.
Indeed.
But all the instruments, $4,000. Wow.
Number of pieces, 10 pieces of instruments.
Wow.
Musical, very fragile. And hold for pickup, flight 23. Long story short, it charged them about $133.92 to ship those instruments over to have them in time for those shows on November 10th. So after those shows ended in Los Angeles in October 57, they were gearing up for that trip to Honolulu. They boarded a ship called the Matsonia, leaving from San Francisco. I believe it was maybe on November 5th to get to Honolulu in time for the shows on November 10th. In the midst of that, Scotty Moore was in charge of the instruments and making sure they got over to the islands. So here, as Robert had mentioned, is the copy of the United Airlines air bill for shipping these instruments over. When Robert and I uncovered this, we both, I think our jaws dropped when we realized Scotty Moore signed for it.
Yeah, I think that's kind of unusual, right? I mean, I'm not really sure why Scotty Moore would be in charge. I guess unless it was just one of those things where he happened to be around. And I thought I saw another document like this where they flew the instrument somewhere and someone signed for it.
Ooh, I'd have to really dig into that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there is. I can't remember much about it. You would know better than me, but I remember because when I was looking for this document, I found another one, but it didn't say Scotty Moore. It said another name, but it was almost the exact same thing. Now, he didn't go to Hawaii in '61, right? Did Scotty go then?
I know Hank Garland was the guitarist, but Scotty might have been on that trip in '61 too. We'd have to look.
Then maybe that's what I saw then. Maybe I saw the form for that show and somebody else had signed for the instruments, but it wasn't him either way. Anyway, it's cool. It's Scotty Moore, so that's pretty cool.
In the midst of the instruments making its way over to the islands, Elvis and the guys made their way over to the islands on a multi-day ship. And this is one of the photos of Elvis on the Lido deck, perhaps, of the Matsonia. And I actually found a blurb of an interview Elvis gave in 1961 where he was telling the reporter, you should. 3 years ago, I was on a ship that took us back from Honolulu back to the mainland, and it was the most relaxing experience. You should do it. He was just suggesting to the reporter. And this is a picture of him on the ship in November of '57, making their way to Honolulu.
Cool. Was it true that I don't know if we established or not that Elvis was afraid of flying, and that's why they took the boat?
In the 50s, Elvis was afraid of flying. If I remember right, and you fans out there might know the story, they were flying over Arkansas. They reluctantly took the plane, and they almost crashed. I mean, and the story goes that night Gladys at home in Memphis, which if it was in 56, they would have been at the Audubon Drive house. She had a premonition that something bad was happening with Elvis. And they were able to successfully land. Elvis got right on the phone to Gladys, and she said, "I felt something wrong." And then Elvis had to admit, "Yeah, we almost crashed." They were so in tune with each other, and it makes sense that her loss really affected the rest of his life quite dramatically.
Yeah, that's interesting because like I was saying, until I started going through all these documents, there was a lot of stuff I didn't know. I didn't know that Elvis was in Hawaii 4 times, right? 4 concerts. The first one is in 57, right? Then of course 61, which Al Dvorin was in charge of because of Tom Diskin's referral or something. I can't remember what the whole thing was, but we have pictures where Al is sitting around a table
with the Colonel.
With the Colonel.
And it was like in a war room,
right.
Game plan for the show. And keep in mind, the purpose of that March of 61 show was to raise money to build the USS Arizona Memorial.
Right,
which, because of that concert, they raised, I think the sum was about $62,000, which helped kickstart the rest of the fundraising.
Yeah.
And there's members of the military in that room with the Colonel.
Right.
Yeah.
You're right. It was almost like a war room. Yeah, but Al was incredibly instrumental in a lot of that stuff, I'm sure. Didn't you have another picture of Al? I'm not sure that you showed me just a little while ago, where he's with the Colonel. I don't know if they're in Hawaii or...
I should have it.
It was towards the back there. There it is.
There it is.
Now, that's Hawaii, right?
Yeah, this was certainly taken in Hawaii. Now, I don't recall if this was Hawaii 1957 or Hawaii 61.
Okay.
But this certainly was taken in the islands when Al was doing his work for Elvis and the Colonel.
Maybe we can match up that shirt with some of the pictures I have from the war room.
And Robert,
yeah,
there's no fighting in the war room.
No, of course not. Of course not. So we're in 57. Elvis has gone to Hawaii and everything. When did the touring stop? I mean, I know he went in the Army, right? So how far, up to what point was he able to continue to tour?
So I believe that Hawaii, those 3 shows in Hawaii in 57 were the last of his shows.
That was it?
Until the Memphis benefit show in February of 61.
Right.
And then a month later, the Hawaii, Arizona benefit show in 61.
Right.
This was it. This has nothing to do with the couple of concerts Elvis gave in 1961, but many of these documents in here detail a marketing plan of these to promote the movie Blue Hawaii. The Lays.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I have one right here. I pulled it because I wanted to show everybody what it is. Because, of course, the show is called Collecting the King. Well, this would be a big part of collecting because, I know all about the tour items. I did a whole show called Elvis on Tour, which I don't know why, it's the most watched show out of all my shows, where I showed all of the different tour items that were sold that Al Dvorin was responsible for. And this is the lei, okay? And that's what we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. It's a disc. I think they call it a medallion in there because what they did was they printed up the medallions first, and they ordered them, and then they had someone design the medallion, right? And then they would order the lei part, which is this god awful brown looking thing, which I think was green, but through the years the leis just deteriorated. I mean, this is barely, there's no way I could even take this out of the bag because this has come, the medallion has become disconnected from the lei, and the lei is falling apart. It's almost like spaghetti now. But anyway, this is what we're talking about.
It was a marketing campaign that, to me, seems like somebody preparing to go to war.
Right, so many documents, right? I mean, there was like almost 50 documents about the leis.
And they were sending grosses. And what's a gross? Is that 144? Is that a dozen? Is the definition
I think so.
A gross? On this summary sheet, all right, sending 4 gross to Honolulu, 24 gross of these leis to Seattle, 10 gross to Portland, 66 gross to Los Angeles, 40 gross to San Francisco, 17 gross to El Paso, 3 gross to Billings, Montana. I guess, yeah, you would send 3 gross to Billings and 66 to Los Angeles. That makes sense. Salt Lake City, 8 gross, 10 gross, San Antonio, and on and on and on, all across the country. This was an effort to, I believe, boost the attendance of Blue Hawaii, which apparently this helped.
Was it specifically Blue Hawaii, or what? Is there anything there that indicates it was also for the USS Arizona, or was just for Blue Hawaii?
No. I believe this marketing campaign was in
just
the
for the
promotion
movie.
of Blue Hawaii.
Wow, and see now that's something too, because most of Al's stuff he was in charge of he was always in charge of or I call it memorabilia, but tour souvenirs and things like that. But here he's in charge of an item that was given away in how did this thing was it record stores? I don't even know.
Or was it
maybe somebody knows out there where they can tell, or maybe it was at the premiere of the movie. I don't know.
Theaters, when you bought your ticket for what was a movie back then, 25, 50 cents to attend.
Yeah, right.
But maybe all these people that were attending Blue Hawaii, maybe they were all wearing leis with their Elvis medallion.
The leis were made as a promotion, and we were trying to determine where they were given out, right? So you were saying maybe in movie theaters, right?
Right. There's a reference here on one of Al's handwritten pieces of paper. Florida State Theaters, shipping charges, $7.05.
There you go. So here's something interesting. And again, if it wasn't for this paperwork stuff, as a guy who's into collecting, I never would have known this, but if you look up in Presleyanna, this album here, Kissin Cousins, all right, this photo, this black and white photo, all right, and you're collecting records too, so you might want to know this, or you already know.
Oh, lay it on me.
Okay, this black and white photo, may have been in record stores. I started collecting Elvis around the time of Roustabout, and I do remember buying my Kissin Cousins album not too far after the Roustabout. I think Roustabout was first, Kissin Cousins was second that I bought back in '64. I don't remember a bonus photo or a photo being given away in the stores, although that was a normal thing that they did quite a bit. So these could have been given away there. But here's the interesting thing, matching it up to this photo was, I know for a fact, was given away at movie theaters when you went to see Kissin Cousins. You would get this photo with a box of popcorn, and I would kill to have the display from the movie theater, because it was a movie theater that I went to all the time when I was a kid. And I remember this big display with this picture all over the display and sparkly letters saying, free picture of Elvis, with purchase of popcorn. But it was only there when Kissin Cousins was showing. Okay, so that's that. So interestingly enough, this could have been the same type of thing.
A letter from from Tom Diskin to Al Dvorin. Kindly have Marilay Corp forward the following to the Colonel. Remaining 1,000 leis with Paramount copy medallions attached. The overage of 4,700 medallions which had been shipped up to New York. No leis on these.
So apparently the medallions were separate in some cases, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe you just get the medallion and you attach it to a string or something. I don't know. But at some point they decided to attach them to leis, because I think in there's also order for the leis alone. Though that's for the medallions, right? And you might want to show that too, because look at the Colonel Parker. I love the
great letterhead.
The Colonel Parker letterhead from Colonel Parker's office in Madison, Tennessee, right?
Madison, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, there's proof here that the leis and the medallions were separate. Mm-hmm, so that's why, every once in a while on eBay or something, you'll see just the medallion. So there's no surprise. Now we know that they didn't always come with the leis. He could have shipped them out to fan clubs. Who knows? Because the Colonel did that a lot.
And just to touch on just the rapport that Al had with Tom Diskin, some of these letters going back and forth are quite playful, and you could tell that they certainly enjoyed working with each other.
Yeah.
So, and that's, I think, something that we'll explore a little bit more in detail. Yeah. Because we did uncover some really great material. Including, should I mention this now?
Yeah, sure. I don't know where it is. I've been trying to find it, but there was a eulogy, right? Is that what you're talking about?
In 1998,
and we found this what he's talking about. We actually found the paper and the handwritten eulogy. Go ahead.
Tom Diskin passed away in a car accident in 1998.
Ironically,
and just 6 years later. Al passed away in a car accident, which is very eerie. But in all these documents that Robert had, thanks to Howard, is Al's handwritten notes of what he was going to give the eulogy at Tom's funeral. And I believe it was about 6 pages long, and it really gave a lot of history about how Al got introduced to the world of Elvis through the Colonel, which was really thanks to Tom Diskin.
I got to tell you, out of all the stuff I found, this was the most amazing thing to me, because I did know Al. Whenever we saw him in Memphis, he was a guest at my show, and we would talk. There were times we sat out in the lobby and just talked, and he would tell me things about working for Elvis and stuff, and did a lot of bragging, which was, hey, if anybody wants to brag about what they did after I see all this man had every right to brag about everything. But I remember, Al was very meticulous about detail. And when we found this paperwork, what he did was, after Tom passed away, he must have went in his hotel room. Was it on hotel stationery?
If true to form, I bet you it was.
I think it was.
Hotel stationery.
But imagine this: he went before the eulogy. He was in his hotel room, and he wrote 6 pages of the story of how Al got involved with the Colonel and Elvis. Mm-hmm. And he attributed it all to Tom Diskin. Exactly. Amazing stuff.
In all of these searching the documents, I think when we were holding those pages, I think that felt like the most important document out of all of this, in my opinion.
Al had always told me that he wanted to do a book, because everybody was doing a book. The bathroom attendant at the gas station down the street was going to do a book of how he pumped Elvis's gas. I mean, that's how ridiculous it was. I'm being facetious, but nonetheless, you know what I mean. Everybody was doing books. So Al wanted to do a book too. And, if somebody had the time to do it, I mean, Howard even approached me about maybe doing the book. And I tell you, after seeing all this stuff, it kind of fires me up. But the most amazing thing was it tells the story of how they met, because apparently Tom Diskin knew Al prior to the Colonel, if I remember correctly, right?
They shared an office in Chicago together.
Right. Tom knew Al. He had a band, and I guess they performed, and then he handled some other people.
Including Tom Diskin's sisters, who did sort of like an Andrews Sisters act.
That's right. Mm-hmm. So when, if I'm correct, and you read the same thing, doesn't he explain that when Elvis was going to be in Chicago, that's how they hooked up, right? It was the amphitheater thing, right?
The March 28th, 57.
Right, so that was the beginning of Al's relationship, I believe, according to what we read. That was the beginning of his relationship with the Colonel. Wasn't there something that we found that Al, they offered Al to go on tour with Elvis, but he didn't want to do it because he didn't want to leave home or something like that? But then Hawaii came about, maybe 57, and he went to Hawaii in 57, right?
I don't know.
Okay, so we don't know if that picture of him in Hawaii is 57 or if that's 61.
I imagine, I have a feeling that this is the March 61.
61, okay. Trip, yeah. Okay, so maybe he didn't then. Because, and I don't know if I heard this from him or I read it somewhere, but if I remember correctly, Al didn't want to travel, I think, was the big thing. And then I think the Hawaii show is what kicked it in. I think then he went to Hawaii and everything changed from there. I don't know. Howard probably knows better than me what that whole story is. But getting back to the eulogy, it in his own words, he tells the story of how he met the Colonel and how Tom was instrumental in his relationship all the way to the end. And which is amazing, because I did not know much about Tom Diskin. So how much did you know about Tom Diskin?
All I knew that Tom Diskin was very important in the Colonel's crew, but I didn't really know to the extent of how important he was to the Colonel.
Yeah, and he must have been, because in the new movie, there's an actor playing Tom Diskin in the movie. So it's almost weird, because it's kind of like Al and Tom Diskin. Both of them were like these important behind-the-scenes people that, should probably have gotten just as much recognition as Sonny West or Joe Esposito or Charlie Hodge. I mean, some of those guys really didn't do much of anything except laugh at all of Elvis's jokes and hung around with him. And of course, they were his bodyguards. But the amount of work that Al had to do and Tom did is incredible. Because we have document after document of conversations between, or correspondence between Al and Tom?
Numerous examples. Even Mary Diskin, which I presume is Tom's wife, there was letters from her to Al. And the same playful nature between Al and Tom also was with Mary. So you could tell in every letter, please tell your wife we say hello. And it seems like when those two couples, the Diskins and the Dvorins, got together, I bet you there was a whole lot of laughs around the dinner table.
In this book of important documents, here is something really cool. Here are 2 letters from the Colonel, and these are actual real letters from the Colonel, not copies, original. One has the Hotel Utah letterhead at the top, and then over here is another one where he says, Al, I'm leaving the Lear jet for you and Hutch, Charlie. I can't read his writing, but anyway, it says the Colonel again. So this is cool. They did have this relationship, and the Colonel and Al had. I mean, there's just tons of, like I was saying, documents in here from Tom Diskin, like several things. You can see Tom's signature here, and Tom's signature over here. Everything always on the Colonel Parker's letterhead. Some of the other stuff we found was, I believe, this is Al Dvorin's speech, right? That he said before. What was the thing? You were even joking about it too. Why don't you explain it? Remember how he crossed out one part? What was that again?
Right. So this letter here on this hotel letterhead, I love Al Dvorin because he would write these important notes on just normal stationery. The Holiday Inn, Greensboro, North Carolina. Well, remember, folks, Elvis did a show in Greensboro, April 14th, 1972, and that's from the movie Elvis on Tour that made it on film when Elvis was wearing the dark blue jumpsuit with the owl belt. And in the movie, I think they used Bridge Over Troubled Water, Funny How Time Slips Away. When the Elvis Lost performances came out, they released the song Release Me from the Greensboro show. Well, Al, before that show, he's preparing to announce to the crowd, well, you're going to notice that there's cameras here, folks. Well, we're making a movie tonight. So the part that he crossed out that he had second thoughts about saying is, so if you'll help us by smiling and applauding and generally being really enthusiastic, that's just the kind of help we need to make a great film. And then after he probably said that in the mirror a few times, I'm thinking he was saying, you know what? I don't have to tell the...
No, this is Elvis Presley.
And this is Elvis 1972. They're going to be
going nuts. So I don't have to tell them to get excited, So he literally just crosses it out and just says those 2 things instead. But there's all this kind of cool stuff in here too, where other things that where his notes, where he wrote down what he was going to say at the concerts and different things like that. And again, here's all like Howard Johnson's letterhead.
So this is, if I may touch on this one here. Yeah, so this was done on Howard Johnson Motor Lodge letterhead, Springfield, Missouri. Well, Elvis's first show of his last tour was Springfield, Missouri, June 17th, 77. And in this, he's talking about the Colonel, writing about the Colonel. EP turns a crowd on with magnetism, and by the same token, the vibes from the crowd reach be in making for an electrifying performance. Elvis is a religion, a cult, a bottle of sunshine wrapped in the image of the man Elvis. Colonel is a true friend with a heart of gold, a genius in promotion, a man of honor. I have no contract, no handshake, just the best relationship any 2 people can ever have. The relationship between the Colonel and Al Dvorin.
Isn't that something? Mm. So that's kind of a tribute to the Colonel directly in his own handwriting too. But yeah, it was cool. We kept finding all these kind of things in here that had to do with kind of personal stuff. Slipping back to the 50s just for a moment, I have a little note about this thing here. Here is a it's impossible to show everything, folks, but here is, right here, this piece of paper here, I've got a little note of what this is. This is actually some of the stuff that he sold in the 50s, you know, souvenirs. You know, there's a mention in here of flasher buttons. And right away, a light bulb goes off on my head. And I'm like, holy cow. I remember back in the 90s going to the amphitheater, and they had a garage sale. And there was this old man, and he had a bunch of flasher buttons. But I mean, of, you know, Nixon and Kennedy and all, you know, anything that could be on a flasher button. And I remember on the boxes, it was from a company called Very View in Chicago. Mm-hmm. So he had Elvis flasher buttons, and he had a lot of them. I mean, you know, I bought them all. I think there were about 10 or 15 of them. You know, I think I even have a picture of me in Memphis with all the buttons on display, which a guy, a fellow dealer, Arnie Gainen, when I first met him, said, you know, don't put out all 10 flasher buttons on the table. You want to make them think that it's rare. You know, you should only have one. Something I learned early in my my dealer profession. But anyway, I remember all these flasher buttons, and I would go back, and this guy would tell me where another flea market he was doing, and I would go back, and he's, yeah, I got more of these at home. So I never knew where these flasher buttons came from, and now on eBay, you can find them. Well, guess what, folks? We have proof right here in documents that those buttons were made for Elvis in Chicago's amphitheater show. It says that they're going to be selling flasher buttons. You know, it's not a lot. It doesn't say Very View, but it's enough to me, enough proof to me to verify my knowledge of what I know about how I found them and where they came from.
And the Chicago show at the International Amphitheater, March 28th, 57, that was his first show of the year. And that started a concert tour that meandered, I think, to St. Louis, Buffalo, New York, made its way to Toronto and Ottawa, Canada, even. So a couple of his few dates outside of the continental United States.
Mm-hmm. Here's something interesting. Now, it just jumps into the 70s real quick, but since it's right here. Anyway, here is an invoice for unused tour necklaces from 1977. Now, I've talked about this before, and those of you who've met Howard, you know the story about the necklaces that were made for his tour in, where was it going to be again before he died?
He was going to open in Portland, Maine.
Portland, Maine. And according to this was June 30th, 1977. Mm-hmm. It says how much they paid for them and how many units were sent. Okay? So anyway, here's the receipt. And that is for this necklace here, which a lot of people, you know, when Howard had these at my show, a lot of people saw this necklace and they didn't know what to make of it because it's not in any price guide, it's not in any book or anything like that, which to me means, wow, why wouldn't you want one of these? You know, I mean, I know these buttons are cool. The one you got on, the one I got on, because these are obviously from the tour thing. I'm not wearing an Elvis shirt, so I figured I had to wear something on Elvis. These are very common. We all know about these. But did you know that there was this necklace that was made for the tours that never happened? And you can see on the back, it's just silver. But that's what this is. So inside a lot of this stuff that we found is documents, a lot of documents about those necklaces and dating them properly so that you know when they were made and how they never made it to, you know, their destination because of Elvis's passing.